Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris. Please forgive me, I'm battling through a little head cold here, so I might look or sound a little weird, but that's why. For all those crazies out there preaching and thinking that everyone goes to heaven, they're sort of right, actually, at least with the underlying assumption in their poor reasoning that it's a simple process to get to heaven. It is. It really is simple. All you have to do is just die in a state of sanctifying grace, and you're there. Likely purgatory beforehand, but still, you're saved. And that's not to discount the sufferings of purgatory by any means, but this vortex is about salvation, not purgation, that we will likely experience. So, if all that's required is to die in a state of sanctifying grace, then wahoo! Sign me up, right? Well, sure, but this is where the rubber hits the road. It's unfathomable that the vast majority of humanity actually does die in a state of grace. The logic then follows that the vast majority of humanity is damned, no matter what Bishop Barron says or smokes. A state of sanctifying grace means you are in a condition of holiness to the degree that the Holy Trinity resides in you. The opposite of this is being in a condition of serious sin, mortal sin, that sin that causes death, that the Holy Trinity cannot abide in you because God cannot dwell where there is sin. So the examination and analysis that has to be objectively engaged in is this: am I in a state of grace or a state of mortal sin right now? In short, the logic continues, if I were to die at this instant, would I be damned or saved? That question is the answer to the much ballyhooed question, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is to be saved, period. So let's look at all this state of grace stuff, shall we? And let's use the analogy of a light switch and a dimmer. Regardless of there being a dimmer, is it truth that the light bulb is either on or off, that there is electricity flowing to the light bulb or there is not? If the switch is on and, say, only 1% of electricity, of light, is being emitted from the bulb, it's still on. The question for the moment is not, is the light really bright? The question is there light, yes or no? Now, if there is no light, then there is no light. No matter how much you twist and turn that dimmer, no light is emitted from the bulb. It's off. So a soul is either emitting light or not. How much light is a different matter, how much light, and that can increase or decrease throughout a moment, an hour, a day, whatever. But there is light, 1%, 87%, there's light. You can say that the bulb is in a state of light to a greater or lesser degree. But if the world were to suddenly end, just stop, and that bulb was to die, would it die in a state of light? Now, how does a soul calculate if it's in a state of grace or a state of not grace, meaning sin, mortal sin? The light that was once present, gone. Well, our blessed Lord himself lays all this out pretty darn clearly. Being in a state of grace means the soul has sufficiently conformed himself to be able to host, to be a home to the Holy Trinity. So, how does that happen? By keeping the commandments. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and my Father and I will come to you, and we will make our home in you. So being a residence for the Holy Trinity requires an act of the will. We must actively choose this and then act accordingly in support of it. It doesn't just happen. It must be chosen by our free will and then reinforced by our actions. Salvation is absolutely dependent on what we do, our deeds. No one is saying we earn or win salvation based strictly on our good works or our good deeds. Salvation was opened up for us as a possibility because of our Lord's passion and death. However, having accomplished that, it is now up to us, as he himself instructs us, to conform ourselves to him by obedience. Redemption was a one-way street, and only Christ could travel it. Salvation is a two-way street, and that is the highway we must travel. So let's take this truth and look at its relevance in the contemporary world. Can we seriously look around and think that the vast majority of people are walking around in a state of grace? Seriously? No. No one except God can judge their souls, but what a person does is produced from their soul. Lawmakers voting for child killing and sodomy, for example. The swamp stealing taxpayers' money and creating massive hardships on families. Politicians' overall refusal to deal with, and in frequent cases, actually cause economic collapse and all the devastating consequences that has on the average citizen. And on a more ground game level, a person, an individual's acceptance of sin and often embracing of it in their own lives, sexual, financial, a man's sexual promiscuity acted on, his lust cast on to another, participation in porn and masturbation, expending his powers where they are not meant to be expended. All these sins are grave in nature, and the Holy Trinity takes leave of such a soul because they cannot dwell there where there is serious sin. A person's indifference to the sufferings of those around them, spiritual ignorance, for example, of their friends and family, the refusal to speak because of fear or being rejected or humiliated, that cowardice. All of these things are serious sins, and a person cannot at the same time embrace these sins and yet still love God, embrace Him too. The two are mutually exclusive. Electricity cannot both be flowing and not flowing to the bulb at the same time. The light is either on or it's off. Despite the insanity of those in the culture who claim non-binary as their identity, as well as those who sit by silently in the face of all of that, the world is very much binary. And most of all, the spiritual world is. You are either in light, even if it's dim, or darkness. You cannot be both. And each human being will either be in heaven or hell, not both, as a result of their actions. Sin and its effects are much more serious and deadly than is commonly believed or lived. All the saints and doctors and fathers of the church for 2,000 years were of near unanimous mind on this point. Most of humanity is damned. To pretend otherwise is foolhardy. God love you. I'm Michael Voris.